Curious Wild West and Mormon historians will often encounter very fanciful stories, mostly made up, of the Danites. Now, the Danites actually existed from 1838 onwards, and we don't have an official date that they stopped existing. And their story is that they were created in the Mormon War of 1838 to counter violence being committed against them. And they had three generals. You had Cornelius Peter Lott, you had Samson Avard, and a man named Jared Carter. Now, Lott's story begins in New York. He joined the church with his wife in 1834, and by 1836 they were forced to flee to Kirtland, Ohio, to the temple there, where the Saints had made their own city. Now, again, violence flared up and they were forced to flee to Haun's Mill, Missouri in 1838. And Mormon historians will know Haun's Mill. I'll explain it in a moment, but it is a brutal, brutal massacre, an act of violence by the state that still rings true to a lot of people who are descendants of the victims. Now, in 1838, on July 4th, it's Independence Day, and they've established their own militia for the Saints. It is led by Lott, Avard, and Carter, and they're dressed up as generals watching a marching band come through town. So it's clear to the locals around them that they are something of a military unit that's seeking to defend their communities. And when the governor of Missouri, Lilburn Boggs, he starts seeing them trying to defend themselves. In fact, Lott actually leads a raid of a local barn which is storing weapons that it's going to be used by a mob to kill everybody in the local area if they're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So he leads a raid with his Danites on this barn. It's successful, but eventually there's an extermination order issued, and they come into Haun's Mill and kill every man, woman, and child. The story there is they issued an extermination order and they said, if you don't leave, you'll be killed. Well, Haun's Mill called their bluff. They said, we don't think you'll kill a bunch of women and children, and sure enough, they came in and they killed every man, woman, and child, oftentimes raping them and brutally cutting them to death or throwing them down the well and sealing it with a stone. And this was witnessed by many people from the forest line. Eventually, the survivors of the Mormons in Missouri, they fled to about 40 miles over the border, and they set up a community there. Lott stayed with Joseph Smith for a little while, working at his little red brick general store that he ran, and he was a fixture in the community. At that point, he was middle-aged with gray hair, and he would wrestle with Joseph Smith, and the two were good pals until Joseph Smith was assassinated. And at that point in time, Samson Avard, who was the man who created the Danites, he distanced himself and he was practicing medicine. He would die in relative obscurity in 1869. The other man, Carter, he would go off to support a man named Strang in the Strangites in the Mormon succession crisis. Joseph Smith died, and a lot of people believed in James Strang, and other people believed in descendants of Joseph Smith's family. Most of them went over to Salt Lake City, and now we have the LDS Church, which was led by Brigham Young. He's the man who ultimately won out. And Cornelius Lott was the only one to go with Brigham Young, and he died in 1850. So he was the original Danite who came to Utah, the original Danite general. Now, there was probably acts of violence after this, people calling themselves the Danites, but surely the only man who I have found that fits the description of a sort of king of Danites, regardless of what Wild Bill Hickman says, the only man who can fit this description is Cornelius Peter Lott.